This meeting to order. It is Thursday, January 17th, 6:33, and we'll begin with the roll call.
Commissioner Kachari.
Here.
Commissioner Young.
Here.
Commissioner Wolf.
Here.
And Commissioners Nemeth and Parker are not here as of yet, at least. Oh.
Or maybe. Nope.
No. And now we'll approve the agenda for tonight's meeting.
I move to approve.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And now we will open up for our first public commentary period. I'd like to remind everyone, we have a lot of people here, please limit your comments to 3 minutes only, and please limit them to agenda items only. We'll have a second public comment period after we get through the agenda where you'll have a chance to speak again, and you can also bring up non-agenda items at that time.
And sorry, really quick before we start the public comments, since I know this is mostly going to be about our artisan vendor commentary, I wanted to just put it into context and quickly read over the rules so that we can a little better understand what the comments mean within the context of the market. So this is included in your packets, just the categories, how do we define the artisans and the producers, and then also our seniority and stall rules that we have at the market. So basically, the artisans are counted separately from the food producers at the farmers market, and that is so that an artisan may only be assigned a maximum of 1 stall annually, whereas our food producers are assigned 3 stalls at the maximum annually, unless they were grandfathered in. And also we have a total number of 144 stalls total, and all of these stalls are assigned annually to our annual vendors. Each vendor will receive, their specific stalls if they're an annual vendor. And the artisans are limited to 12 of those 144 stalls can be assigned to artisans, whereas the rest remain open for food producers. And the way that vendors move from what we call daily vendors, so daily vendors are vendors that are not assigned a permanent stall. They are assigned what is left on a market day after the annual vendors have signed in. So when an annual vendor retires, the daily vendor will move up into their spot to receive a permanent stall, and this is all based on seniority. So when you joined the market determines your seniority. So the longer you've been there, the higher in seniority you are. So basically right now, artisans wait for an artisan vendor to retire as an annual to move up, and food producers wait for a food producer vendor to retire to move up to an annual. And I think what has happened is, as we'll hear with the comments, there is a sort of a number of artisans that have gone up to the top of the daily vendor list in seniority. And then there are food producers that are kind of on the daily list below them, but then when we assign the annual stalls, they jump ahead of the artisans and get an annual stall, if that makes sense. Okay. Does anyone have any questions before kind of we get into this about how that functions? Okay, all right, thank you. So yes, please come up one at a time and 3 minutes.
Okay, there used to be a lot more artists than there are now. The mix of vendors, nobody's saying that more stalls should be taken up by more and more hordes of artists. The mix of vendors should be controlled when we accept vendors in the first place, as has already become the case. It's not reasonable or fair to accept vendors and then treat them unfairly. Artists pay the same fees, follow the same rules, face the same rigorous inspections to prove that we also produce our goods. We have farmers, bedding plant sellers, coffee shop owners, chocolate, hot sauce, pesto, pickle makers, beekeepers, fish and meat sellers, florists, zingermans. There's no other special category that's singled out with a fear of them taking over the market, which could happen with any kind of category if we let them all in to become vendors, just artists. In reality, at our market, it means a few human beings who have been here over 20 years are treated unfairly. It's hurtful, demoralizing, unfair, and wrong. Every July, I see vendors starting years and years after me move ahead of me. Artists are waiting years or even decades longer to get stalls. If we were made full members, the vendors after us would only be delayed a short time, 1, 2, or 3 years, and would still pick in the same order as we pick now. They wouldn't go backward at all. If we don't change things, I might not get a stall for another 10 years. Producers just got stalls after 14 years. I've been coming for 22. Christine and Carol longer than me, and they don't have stalls. This would not change how many artists are there on any given day or how many stalls artists take on any given day. Would not change by changing this rule. It would only change that we get to pick stalls in the order of seniority based on when we started. By only owning one annual stall, nobody wants 3. There's lots of artists who still only keep 1. Several of us want 2, and by not getting to own 2 means we never get to sort of pay our dues and be done with it and own 2 stalls and come and set up in them. We have to worry every single morning, can we find 2 together? Will we be able to, one goal is to stay in the same place all the time so customers know where to find you when they come looking for you. We can never feel relaxed that we'll ever be able to do that even if we come for 50 years. And in July, we freak out because somebody could take the stall next to our single stall when we need 2 on a daily basis and boot us out of the spot we've been in. The separate artist category should be eliminated. We should just be regular members of the market like everyone else. No one else is singled out. At the very least, there's 3 open stalls right now. The 3 top people on the daily list, Christine, Carol, and I, have all been here well over 20 years. At the very least, award those 3 stalls to us. And the next best thing would be to give the current vendors annual stalls, but preferably just make us regular, just like there's no other category of people singled out. And like I said, changing this won't make any more artists. It will just let us pick fairly like everybody else in every other category of vendor. And then just don't let any more artists in. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Debbie Marx, and I've been an artist at the Ann Arbor Farmers Market for 27 years. And I'm glad we're addressing the seniority issue for artists. This is a farmers market, and our farmers are golden here. But I don't think that means that we should discriminate against the artists, especially the ones that have been coming for 20 years or more. I am a fortunate one. No one had to die for me to establish my stall. Someone just moved away to be with her grandchildren. So I was lucky, but that is how you get a stall at the market if you're an artist. Someone has to pass. It's very bittersweet. I believe that the 3 open stalls should go to top seniority artisans, and that you blend the seniority list from then on according to seniority for all the vendors. I've also noticed that when this market meeting starts on television, it doesn't say farmers market anymore. It says public market now. I thought that was interesting. I would also think it would be fair for those of us artists that take 2 stalls every market day, pay for 2 stalls, that we can't make the paperwork match what we do every market day. It wouldn't increase the amount of artists. It would be us still there. But the rules would, like Ann said, we could pick 2 stalls next to each other, come unload, move out of the way of the dailies, and make for a more seamless transaction that way. If the paperwork could just match what we do. We've never been turned away. We always fit in. If the paperwork could match what we do, that would be more fair to us, and we wouldn't have to worry about this every single day. The reason this market is so popular after 100 years, I believe, is because of the blend of art and produce and flowers. All produce is not edible. Some are flowers. Some markets categorize them in edible and not edible. If flowers were in with art, that would be a much bigger category. But I don't think this discrimination should continue, especially for the high seniority artists that are cornerstones of this market. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Market Master and Commissioners. My name is Christine Shuprai. I stand before you today to readdress the issue of honoring the seniority of long-term artisan vendors. Many artisan vendors attending this public market have attended for more than 2 decades, yet our seniority has not been honored, and we have been excluded from the assignments of a permanent booth space. We literally have to wait until a vendor retires or dies before we gain access to a permanent stall under these current bylaws. Case in point, I have attended this market going on 24 years. That is 1 year short of a quarter of a century, and I still do not have a permanent stall, nor have I been considered for one. Yet there are growers that have attended for, I believe, less than 10 years that have leapfrogged over us and acquired a permanent space. It's very defeating to me as a long-term vendor to see this practice continue year after year. It's also somewhat annoying to have customers repeatedly tell me, "Oh, you're back. I looked for you last week, but you weren't here." But I was there. And the market's big enough that you do get lost, and we don't have the same space, so people don't know where to look for us. We have proven as artisans time and again that we want this market to succeed by continually attending, establishing long-term relationships with market customers. We undergo inspections, make and improve our products, and contribute to a variety of items for sale at this market. We abide by the same rules as growers and producers, yet the bylaws exclude us when it comes to a permanent stall assignment. We are not asking for special privileges, we're asking for equal treatment. Because again, separate has proven to not be equal, and by continuing to ignore our seniority is to continue to perpetuate what I consider to be an archaic caste system. Please consider updating the bylaws to make this a fair and equitable venue for all market vendors. Thank you.
Okay, I just would like to, I think this is a pretty big deal. It's a big deal to the artisans. I think it's a big deal to the producers as well. So I think that it's something that the commission would want to study, but wouldn't want to make a quick decision on, would want to get all of the information, more information. There's always information that people don't have as far as history. And all of the artisans now that are at the top of the list of the dailies joined the market when the rules said they're always going to be at the bottom of the list, except for those who had annual stalls. So there has been some changes made to help them be in a better position. And now that they have all risen to the top, I can understand why they feel the way they do, but I don't think that this decision should be made quickly. The other thing is, they're talking about 3 open stalls. I think actually there are 6. 3 of those are reserved for Jana. If we built a building and took off 3 stalls at the end, on each side at the end of the short aisle, I think that needs to be investigated to see, because my point would be, if 3 are reserved for her, then we need to be fair to the 3 to whoever has those 3 on the other side. The other thing about it is, as far as 2 or 3 stalls side by side, there are a lot of produce vendors who don't have 2 or 3 stalls side by side either. My seniority is back to like 82, and we have 2 stalls in one location and 1 stall in another location. And I know that many of the people who set up back in the area by 4th Street will have 2 or 3 stalls, but they're not side by side.
Thank you.
Do we have any other public comments?
I will say a few people were not able to make it today and emailed in public comments. Those comments are in your packets. And I think some actually did end up making it, and so you can, I won't necessarily read those, but I just want to just to give them a voice, call your attention to Gracio's Greenhouse did email in, and they said that they have been over 50 years, have seen it packed with farmers and then few farmers and then packed again. If we allow the artisans more stalls, could be a problem down the road if the farmers become packed again. The artisans may only own 12 stalls, but they seem to always have more than that on Saturdays. I think we should keep the stalls for artisans the same as it has been. If there are empty stalls, maybe we should look into letting vendors increase the number of stalls they have. That means the I think what she means there is letting producers that have 3 stalls increase to 4. And the other letter that was from Tadachek Farming Greenhouses, and they wrote, they are an annual producer vendor with 3 permanent stalls. Regarding the suggestion that policies be changed to increase the number of artisan vendors in the market, they should be allowed to have up to 3 permanent stalls with the same rights as annual producers. They don't believe that the policy should change. An influx of artisan vendors with multiple stalls would change the nature of the market. The Saturday market is a farmer's market, and producers should remain the primary focus of the market. A change that should be considered is to return the maximum number of stalls for annual producer vendors to 4 stalls. There are annual producer vendors who would willingly purchase a 4th permanent stall, which would consume the extra stalls that are currently available. And then today I got a comment from Jill Latta that she thinks the rules should remain the same. Did I miss one? Ann Monheit, thank you. Ann Monheit wrote in and said, she's given a great deal of thought regarding the 7 daily artisans who seem to be stuck at the top of the daily vendor list. They will only become annual vendors when annual artisans currently holding 1, or in some cases 2, of the 12 annual artisan spaces leave the market. These 7 daily vendors have been supporting and attending the market and maintaining their seniority for many years, some over 20 years. In the meantime, they have been passed over every year, while daily producer vendors have been attending the market for a much shorter period of time, are given annual status. This directly affects the location of the spaces and space that are available to them each market day. I waited 20 years to become an annual artisan vendor, so I understand the frustration all too well. There is much controversy and debate over the issue. While there are probably some annual produce vendors that are opposed to artisans being at the markets at all, it can't be denied that artisans do have the variety of items available to customers to enjoy and expect. Having said that, these 7 artisan vendors come quite regularly to market. Giving them annual status would not change the market mix in any way. Increasing the allowed annual artisan spaces from 12 to at least 19 would simply level the playing field in terms of stall choices. Okay, so thank you.
Okay, now we will move on to approving the minutes from our November meeting.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Presentations? No. Okay. Our first agenda item is to discuss the artisan vendor policy.
And just to give you the 3 stalls that everyone keeps referencing, every year when farmers don't come back for the year, we reassign those stalls to new daily vendors. They get to move up the list. Half of them go to new daily vendors, and half of the empty stalls go to annual vendors that want another space, that want to add up to 3. This past year and the year before that, half of the stalls went to dailies, and then not enough annual vendors wanted to add that extra stall, so we ended up with some leftover stalls. And there are 3, and in regard to Carlene's question, there are 3 not assigned because of Jana, in case we build the infrastructure project. We're leaving some stalls unassigned for a drive-through that might affect us in the future. But there are an additional 3 stalls that are not assigned that are just empty. So that is the 3 that we're talking about there.
Also, Stephanie and I spoke a little bit about this in advance, and I think it's important to say that we don't have to come up with any policy changes or suggestions today. We can ask Stephanie to come back next month with some recommendations. I know a lot of this market bylaw stuff is really complicated, and this is an opportunity for us to ask questions within ourselves, and then we are also, Stephanie told me we are welcome to ask the public too if we have any clarifying questions. We have a lot of senior vendors here who have a lot of history in the market, so now's our chance to gather more information.
So do you all know the history of the, there's 144 stalls, right? And then there's 12 for artisans and 132 for the food producers. Do you know how that ratio got worked out? Is it just sort of history, or was it based on a percentage, or who had the stalls?
I don't know all of the information. I know there used to be a lot more artisans with the market, and then it was decided to have a certain percentage be there as annual vendors, and that's when they changed that. And I believe that the Sunday Artisan Market was created as an avenue for some of those artisans at that point to still have a market. And this might be a good question for the audience, who would know better than I would. If anyone in the audience knows more about when that decision was made, if you would like to.
For the Sunday market?
To make it 12 out of the 144. It was during the mediation.
I thought it was before mediation.
It might have been before
Bruce,
mediation.
do you know?
It goes back to the late 70s anyway. That's what there were 12, actually it was supposed to be 10, and at one time there were, well, it still is one vendor that has 2 stalls, but there were 2 vendors that had 2 stalls, artisan vendors that had 2 stalls, and it was capped at, or they said, okay, well, there's 2 that had 2, and so they moved it from 10 to 12. But previous to that, we've been here since '78, and previous to that, it was capped at 10 annual, and so it's been 12. It was capped at 12.
So it's actually been a number of stalls rather than a percentage of stalls, is what I'm understanding.
Yeah, sounds like it. And then I think another, Christine.
Just to give you perspective as to how many artisans there are now as opposed to when I first started, which is back in 1995, I was number 143 on the list. There were 142 artisans ahead of me. Well, on the list, I was 143.
Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah, and if you actually have a comment, could you please just speak into the mic? So, because since we are on TV and we're recording it, then we're supposed to speak into the mics. Thank you.
Can I say something?
Will you, just run up.
There's some discrepancy between what the number of annual stalls and what actually happens on a day at market. Because there's how many, do you know, Stephanie, how many artisan markets there are at market? Dailies and annuals combined?
How many
Artisan
artisan vendors?
Yeah.
So there are the 12 assigned booths.
Which is to 11 people,
Annuals.
because Deanna has 2.
I think 2 artisans might have 2, so that's.
Okay, so 10.
10.
And then there's 7 or 8
And
more
then
of
there's
us.
7 on top of the list for the dailies, and then
Okay.
below that,
There's Stephen.
I brought my
and-
notes, because I knew someone would ask.
So,
So step 17, and then there's 1, 2, 4, I believe.
because
after that.
changing this rule would not change in any way by allowing us to gain annual stalls like regular vendors. Stephanie, it would not change in any way the number of vendors, or unless we moved it up to allowing 3, which I would be so surprised if anybody ever took more than 2. It would not change on any given day the amount of artisan vendors at market or the amount of stalls they take, correct? The only thing that would change that is if you accepted a brand-new artisan vendor into the daily list.
Correct.
Right. So changing this would not make any more stalls go to artists, what we're asking for. Not a single more stall would go to an artist than already has been for the last, and several of the people after me have been coming for even longer than me, but during 1 year, they missed getting there 15 times. So of us 7, we've all been coming more than 20 years.
Okay. Thank you.
So I guess just to clarify then, so there are 144 stalls.
Yes.
And all of those get assigned to an annual, but it's then anyone who doesn't come gets backfilled with dailies.
Yes.
Okay, and so that's what we're talking about. So all the ones that are backfilled with dailies normally are essentially stalls of annuals that aren't there.
Yes.
Okay.
That's exactly it.
I have a question too. I just want to make sure I understand. So right now it's 12 of the 144 are allotted for artisans. And does anyone know if that number, the number 12, it sounds like that's been around for a long time, has the number, so that I'm trying to figure out if the number 12 has held steady while the number 144 has, while that part has shifted and gone up or down, or have those two been the same for a long time? Okay.
Same.
So the proportion has remained the same for a long time. Thank you.
Mhm.
Well, I think this is really a question of, determining a good, diverse mix of vendors at our market and the best policies around that. I think from my limited understanding, I think we have a good gateway system in place now where new incoming applications are reviewed by the market manager, who has some determination of like any needs in the market. If we have less bakers after a number of years, we'll take in a new bakery vendor. If there are less artisans, so there's some selection process at intake, correct?
Yes.
Which it sounds like in the past maybe there wasn't. There were many more artisans were coming in, and that's why this policy was put in place. So we have one gateway in place in determining the mix, and then this would be sort of the next gateway or the next sort of selection process. Go ahead.
I was going to say, with the gateway, that is a good point. We are selective and try to keep a balance of each type of product when vendors apply. That's the first way we have control over that. But we don't have control over it after they've been admitted. So we have no control over how many quit, how many leave, because once you're admitted, you're permanently a vendor with the market. So I would say that as time goes by, things still can fluctuate for type of product and how much is represented, just because once you're in, and we only control it at the beginning.
I definitely, I am a producer, and I, want to prioritize. It seems like everyone wants to prioritize farmers at this market. But as I've been mulling this over and thinking about it, I don't see why we couldn't come up with a new sort of hybrid policy that builds in a little more flexibility than the current system. I wanted to ask you, Stephanie, this, issue of annual stalls not being selected during the move-up process. That's fairly new, right? That's only happened the past 2 years.
As far as I know of, that hasn't happened often before. Yes, and then the past 2 years that happened.
I guess I'm just wondering if we could come up with sort of a new procedure for when that happens, looking at those unclaimed stalls and then revisiting the list and addressing even, still prioritizing producers, or, maybe of the unclaimed stalls, X percentage of them are offered to the next producers on the list, and X percentage is offered to the next artisans on the list, but building in a little more flexibility is just one suggestion I came up with.
Stephanie, I have one more question. Do you foresee in the future that the number of stalls could change at all?
The 144
Yeah.
will never change.
Will never change, okay.
Well, no, that's not true. We're gonna, if we get the building built, then it will change, and we will be adding more there. So that I spoke too quickly.
So I'm wondering if, that's why I was asking about the number 12 and the number 132. Would it make sense, anticipating that there may be more stalls in the future, or there could be a decrease in stalls if, something else happens and the city wants to put in more parking or, anything? Would it make sense to say a percentage of the stalls is for artisans, and then a percentage is for food producers in the bylaws, and then that builds in the possibility of the number of stalls changing?
So having a percentage instead of a
The
solid concrete number.
The actual numbers. And then maybe adding in Alex's idea when there's unclaimed stalls to write some regulations on that.
Another thought and suggestion I had, and this affects more than just this artisan and producer ratio, is we have a minimum number of times you have to attend the market in order to remain an annual vendor. And the number is 15, which out of, I think in our report, we had 186 market days last year, so it's not a lot. And we could also consider, increasing that number of minimum days you have to attend to retain your annual spot, and that would reward both artisan and producer vendors that are committed to coming to the market more often. And I think and that would also encourage changeover.
So it sounds like there's a couple issues or a couple of proposals for changes, and one of them is about changing seniority and blending artisan seniority with producer seniority. It sounds like the other one is to increase the number of stalls that are allowed to 2 for artisans, right?
Yeah.
And then the third issue that I heard was assigning these 3 open stalls to those with top seniority, which maybe would be grandfathered in or handled if we handle the issue of blending artisan seniority with producer seniority. But I'm just trying to separate out the issues, because it seems like there's 2 or 3 that we need to kind of think through. Did I miss anything?
Well, and I've got something similar in that way too, that, and we could just eliminate the whole class of artisans and just say that they're all producers. And that's one thing that's been proposed, and that would be simplifying in this. It poses challenges, but that's a possibility. Or so with changing the numbers, modifying how we do seniority assignment, and exactly how that works, if it is by the requirements for that, or what I've heard with this too is that there's desire for proximity to where you were before, and does it have to be the exact same spot or somewhere nearby? And maybe there's a way to work that, and I don't know, and codifying that in a framework. I could see doing that in software, but I couldn't write that in a legal document. Yeah, so but there might be a wiggle room in there too, because again, looking at the need, it sounds like what the concern is oftentimes that the annuals do move around, and they move around radically. It's not just they move a site or 2. You have to run around and find them. And if they only moved 15 feet, is that close enough to being in the same spot? And for some, it may not, because they need their vehicles in a certain way and they have a certain setup. Others, it may be. And so I don't know what a fair way to, right now we've got a really rigid system. You know, you could do a bidding system or something like that, where how do you value it? But then that introduces other problems too. But it seems that the root of it is that there's kind of, that people get stuck in their spot and having things kind of the way it's always been, and then that doesn't make for a very flexible system for others to come in. And so it would incur pain either way, but at least what I hear with this is desire for proximity. And that may not, if we loosen that, does that help us for not having exactly the same everything? And maybe, I don't know, if that gives us flexibility to solve the problem, great.
I think that is one of the big issues, but I don't know of a good solution, I guess.
There's one more thing I wanted to add to the list of suggestions you were parsing out, is we also got from a couple annual producer vendors, suggestions that the current stall limit of 3 be raised to 4, because they would probably willingly take a 4th, and that would have snatched up those 3 available stalls. So that was another suggestion floating around out there. I had one other point, but I'm forgetting it now.
Maybe it'll come back to you while I interject really quickly. I think just from a process perspective, it would be helpful for me to have a layout of the core issues and the suggestions or proposals for each, or maybe other options, that, you know, could handle each of these issues, so that we can look at each of them and talk through the relative merits.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
That makes sense.
I did want to make one clarifying point. Someone in the public comment, and I forget who it was, said that dailies have to wait for a vendor to die or retire to get a spot. And that is the case for a producer as well as an artisan. It's not just the case for artisans. So I just want to make that clear. And I did have a question maybe for some of the annuals in the audience. If you, because I haven't been an annual, so I don't know how this works, if you have 1 or 2 assigned stalls, but you want a 2nd or a 3rd, and I guess it depends on where you're on the list, but how hard is it to get the 2nd or 3rd extra one that you want, or 4th, or whatever the case is? Does that question make sense?
I would just say that it depends on the time of the year. If it's probably November through April, it's not hard at all. But the rest of the year, and it depends how high you are, and there's also seniority among the annual vendors. So if you're a newer annual vendor, you're going to be just ahead of those 7 artisans. So it depends where you want to be in the market and the time of the year. If you're higher up in the annual list of seniority, no, then it's not hard. But if you're farther down, it's the same program.
Thanks.
But if you're not on there, it's impossible.
Yeah.
Not hard, but impossible.
Are there many annual vendors, artisan or producers, that add on stalls, like on a weekly basis, to their assigned?
So I would say, as you could see with the stall assignment last year, not a lot of the annual vendors add an extra stall onto their stall each week. There are a few that have not had the chance yet to select a 2nd stall, and that's because they only, like this past year, received annual stalls, and they won't get the chance until next year. So I would say maybe 2 or 3.
Just
of the
at
annuals.
the bottom of the list?
At the bottom of the list. And then the dailies are a different matter. Yeah.
And I guess one other question too, just so seniority is defined by number of years of being a valid member or whatever, so that means attending 15 times or more in a year?
Yes.
So a different way to assign seniority would be just number of, let's say, Saturdays that I counted on a more frequent basis, and that would be a different way to assign that, which might be rewarding those who are there more frequently, get more fixitude about where they are, because the assumption would be that those would be the ones that you really need to be there. Maybe that's, I don't know if that's a problem or not, but.
No, I think that's a really interesting way to look at it, and I think the proposal that I had mentioned earlier of increasing those minimum number of attendance days kind of gets at that. We don't really have a way to reward those vendors who do show up consistently. A lot of the artisans do show up pretty consistently, and since seniority is only in terms of number of years you've been there, and we don't weight attendance, I think it might be worth thinking about, could we also weight attendance in seniority, which would be a more complicated system, but not impossible.
And it might change every year, right?
And might change every year.
So I heard Holly suggest we have a sort of listed out, you know, the suggestions and the proposals that are sort of on the table that we could look at. Is there any other information we'd like Stephanie to bring back to us next month?
I think that's good.
Yeah.
That'd be great, yeah.
I would be interested, I think, from a contextual perspective, to know if there are any similar markets and that have set like percentage of, you know, artisan to produce, if that's a best practice or even a practice that's done elsewhere, and maybe would have experience that we could learn from, so that we're not making it up as we go, but can try to learn from others. It would obviously have to be a comparable market and a comparable kind of community, but if there's something that we can draw on, I think that might be helpful.
Okay. So I'm going to, the issues that, the core issues are one stall only for annual artisan vendors. Just mixing the list completely versus them as two separate categories. And these 3 extra stalls that we have right now, and then increasing the stall limit to 4. So then I'm going to take, those are the core questions I'm hearing. I'm going to take those and come up with the specific recommendations we've kind of talked about here for each of those core issues so that we can see the possibilities and bring them back. And then I'm also going to look at best practices at other markets. Okay, great.
Thank you. Thank you.
So now we will discuss the market infrastructure project.
So I guess we have some new faces here. The building is still on hold. We're still, keeping in mind other sources of revenue and funding for the building. We still completely support the building of this structure. However, in the meantime, our commission has decided to look into ways of also providing winter solutions while we're considering this, because we don't have a timeline. So we got a bid for radiant heat overhead at the market. The bid in the packet is for gas, radiant heat, and I'm also waiting to get the electric, the same company to bid an electric cost, and also looking into possibilities of grants for solar to power that electric if we were to install electric. However, it's more complicated because we have to add a whole new panel. It will be really expensive if we do that. Whereas the gas, we can hook up to the gas line that's nearby and do that. So I just wanted to include the quote that's what I've been able to get so far, and is kind of an ongoing exploration. And I've also been looking into companies that might do the tarps or some sort of side. I had shared with you before the previous study Sarah had done regarding the pull-down walls. And because we were curious what they had found there, and the concern was that the foundation was not strong enough for the structure to support the pull-down walls. We would need to get a company to come out and assess the foundation, and that would be very, very costly before we would be able to get a quote for what those walls are. So I think unless there are other requests, I've been sort of looking in another direction to see if there's something much more lightweight or that we could do. But I haven't found anything yet. Instead of just been working on the heat. So we're basically looking at these two things. Heat for this is heat actually just for that, the main aisle, the first section of the main aisle up to the middle aisle.
Okay.
Okay.
So it's not the whole thing. And
By first section, you mean on the office side or on the Carytown
south side.
side?
on the office side.
Okay. Connecting to the office, that little leg?
Yeah,
or-
the little leg
Okay.
connecting to the office, and then the first, like along Detroit straight to the middle aisle. So that main aisle there. And that's what that bid covers, heat for that. And then, again, we would look at the same thing for walls if I was able to find that. And then last month you had a question about funds, and I just wanted to get back to you on that. So the question had been, where was the funding coming from for the building originally? We had several sources of funding. So $350,000 from the market fund, which is our own savings, $100,000 from millage, $129,000 from developer contributions was the original. And then when we got a bid that was much higher than expected, the Downtown Development Authority committed another $200,000 to fund parking related aspects of the project. And the Market Commission supported an additional $100,000 from available market funds, but it still remained underfunded. So the millage, developer contributions, and the market fund were the main sources, and that's kind of how each of them.
Do you have that total again? I just,
So our latest, our latest total, this was in the last update in June, was that the project cost would be, had a shortfall of about $500,000 in funding.
So that's 880K.
From the bid of like
880,000 is
1.3,
what that is
so-
what we've got thus far.
880, oh, you just added it, okay.
Yeah. So, but this is, I guess I did not include this update in the packets, because we've shared it before, but I can just give this to you. This has the latest totals that's also on our website, if anyone wants to go and see that. It's public on our website. Okay, so I think that is all I have for the infrastructure project, and I'll continue getting quotes unless there's anything new.
So I've got, I know, just a few comments with, I'm glad we've got the estimate for the gas to get a sense of kind of where that is. It's not too horrible in itself, in terms of, but it also is for a small part of the market, and it just kills me to think of just dumping a ton of heat into a ventilated space.
Yeah.
It just seems really counter to kind of the spirit. I can see how it'd be a little bit more comfortable, and also it does provide another strange kind of separation that would maybe a problem too, in terms of having certain places warm, certain places not, and I don't know. I guess I'm not over the moon about it, but
I agree.
it's useful to have the data.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I think ideally it would be in combination
Yeah.
with some sort of size. Yes.
The other thing too is I've been exploring more on other ways to side in that, and the more it seems that existing the existing structure, trying to retrofit in there, that as I've spoken to other groups, other engineers too, as to what might do. Again, anything's possible, but it just sounds really expensive to do that, which then kind of gets us back to the same situation. That there have been some proposals, someone here, Ed, for is talking about other ways to maybe take that first leg, actually the part that you're talking about heating, and kind of just renovating that section, which has a lot of merit as a section to kind of run as a test. And also, it's already connected to bathrooms, it's already on flat grade. You could, if you modified that section, there's a lot of merit to the idea, and it could be substantially less expensive, but it would still be a project. And that's, right now, we're kind of at crossroads in terms of how moving forward with the bigger construction, if that can ever go forward, if it ever reaches budget, or coming back and kind of revising something more locally. It's a challenge, but just to let you know that there do seem to be maybe better ways to work it out within revising some of the existing structure, but it would be, there are ideas out there that might be helpful, and so figuring out ways we can work forward with that, I think, might be worth exploring.
Would you be interested in coming up with some more concrete ideas for next meeting?
Okay.
Great.
Now, Stephanie, you got a quote from like an engineer firm for exploring the foundation?
No, not a quote. I asked the firm that did the estimate for us for the pull-down sidewalls what they thought it might cost to have a company assess the foundation, and kind of off the cuff, they said, well, we would guess maybe $40,000 for an assessment. So I did not get any quotes though. So that is not.
I would like to see a quote for that exploration, because I just think where we are right now, I really don't like the word tarps. I don't want to ever think of tarps enclosing our market. I want something more permanent, in tightly sealed in a track, whatever. And like Peter, I don't like the thought of any heat without enclosure. And it's looking to me, I mean, we will put the building out for bid again in the spring. It's possibly, it's hard for me to have faith in that, because we've had 2 bids come in so much higher than the raised funds. So I really think our next clear avenue, even if it is a really big cost, is exploring that foundation and seeing precisely what could be, what the, load-bearing capacity of the current structure is, and then how nice of an enclosure we can put in that. And I say enclosure and not tarp, because I don't want to think of it that way. I want, restaurant grade, like real enclosure with access points and everything. That's sort of my vision.
Yeah, and I think that's a really fair point, and I think making it quality is very important, even if it is a little extra. Yes, I can absolutely try and find a quote for assessing the foundation.
So now we will discuss the transfer of seniority procedures.
Okay, this is in here because we have had a request for a transfer of seniority, and this has to come through our commission before it can be approved. The request is in your packet, but, sorry, it's such a long packet. Find it. Okay, so the procedure is, first of all, eligibility to transfer a stall. It's it's difficult to transfer a stall from one person to the next, because we do encourage new businesses to move up and older vendors to retire. However, in this case, it's the death of an immediate family member. So Lois is requesting to take over the annual vendor stall from her husband, and that does meet all of the requirements for eligibility under our first requirement. except the only one it didn't meet was she had to return in the application within 60 days of that, and that was mostly because I was on maternity leave and I was not able to facilitate that, so I suggest we kind of overlook that requirement and approve it. So I guess I just need a motion from the commission.
I motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So that was Peter, and who seconded?
I did,
Okay,
Holly.
thank you. Okay, so basically, that is a motion to approve the request for transfer of seniority for Lois Hochstetler for our family farms, that she can be the owner and maintain her annual vendor seniority. This will then go to the Community Services Administrator to make the final decision.
Now we will discuss the yearly meeting calendar for 2019.
These dates and times follow our regular schedule of meetings. I also need a motion in a second if this works for everyone.
All motion to approve?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And now it's time for the PMAC officer ballots.
Okay. It's our time to select, time of year to select new officers, or all of our officers are eligible to run again. If you want to chair, actually, I didn't, if you want to chair this out of your packet,
We have our
and,
schedule at the back of it.
oh,
That's all.
oh, sorry. That's okay. You can remember the schedule.
I'll take your.
And then have two separate, one for the chair and one for the vice chair. Let me just quickly read from the rules how this goes. So, the officers of the commission shall be chair and vice chair. Each year at the January organizational meeting, officers shall be elected by secret ballot from among the members of the commission. The officers shall be elected for a one-year term by the majority of members present. No member shall serve more than 3 consecutive full terms in the same office. The term of each officer shall run for the first meeting of January to the first meeting of January the following year. That is, yes, that is it. So it is by secret ballot, but that does not mean we can't ahead of time say whatever we want and then we're voting secretly. But the question is anyone interested or willing to be chair?
Yeah, are our current chairs,
Are
our current chairs
Are.
interested or willing to continue in their current chair positions, I guess would be
Much
my
better
question.
put.
Yes?
I'm interested and willing, but I'll also step down if someone has an interest, so.
And who's the vice chair?
Peter.
Okay. Yes, I'm willing. I haven't actually had a chance to execute that role.
Right around.
Sure, I'm willing to continue as vice chair.
Clearly the responsibility.
Yeah, exactly, I know.
And thank you again
Power.
to both of our chair and vice chair for your wonderful service this past year. Okay, so let's vote. The vice chair ballot is one of these papers and the chair ballot is the other. If you could please vote and pass them to me, and I will let you know who is our new chair and vice chair.
Don't peek.
I won't, exactly. Be upset.
Thank you. All right, we have Alex is our chair, thank you, and Peter, you are our vice chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do we have any non-agenda items?
I just wanted, I'm sorry, I don't know if can I add non-agenda
Yes.
items? Okay.
Yes,
So
you can.
I was looking at the market infrastructure project update. So I know this was an actual agenda item, but I missed, my thought came after we'd moved on. And I was just rereading this and noting that this indicates that the budget amount unfunded was like 140,000. And then it says not, which is different than the 500,000 somebody mentioned by a fair amount. And then it says not counting developer contributions in the amount of 120,000. So does that mean that's 140,000 minus 120,000? So that actually leaves 20,000 that's not funded? No.
No, I think, and then where was that?
It's
Oh, that's
on
it,
the
okay. Yeah,
paper.
so I think part of it too is because we have put it out for bid twice, or 3 times now. We put it out for bid 3 times now, so the,
Developer contributions have shifted?
it's
Or
a few,
commitment.
a lot of numbers have shifted. So
Okay.
our shortfall, I believe the first time we had put it out for bid was much less, and that
Okay,
might be where
that's
some of those
unfortunate.
numbers came from. And then we put it out for bid again, and then since the last time we put it out for bid, the shortfall was closer to 500,000 or.
But presumably that first bid would still be valid, right? Are you saying you got a different bid from the same contractor?
I don't remember which contractor did which, or if it's the same. I know both times the bids went out to several contractors.
Uh-huh.
So I'm not sure if it was the same one that the final bid came in. But no, it's not, yeah, it's not the same.
I thought if I'm recalling from when this happened, the subsequent bids were after a revised version of the plan.
Oh, I see.
So it was
That would
called
explain
like,
it.
there's a word for it, but Curris was working on it, and it's called like budget redesigning, or, you know, basically and then that was what was so shocking, was it was a pared down plan, and then the bid came in higher. So it was a different project that was put out each time.
That's, yes, that's true. So the original bid came in, we went back with that same bid company, pared down the plan, then their bid based on those new pared down plans was still high. So then we said, no thanks, and then we sent it out for bid again more recently.
And another company
And then-
came back with a greater shortfall.
Or it was the same, I don't know if it was another
Okay.
company or not.
I was just trying, I'm sorry to take us backwards, and I was just trying to pull this apart a little bit, because if at some point for the project as currently envisioned, there was a shortfall of somewhere around $140,000, that's not very much money, right, in the scheme of things. And we're looking at a proposal to heat a part of the market and do a very piecemeal solution for a third of what the shortfall is. And so I just wanted to kind of make that context clear. It's probably really obvious to everyone, but it really struck me that I think it was like $50,000 roughly is the proposal to do the heating, and that would get us quite a lot closer to the shortfall as outlined here. So I would hate for us to make a piecemeal response, to take a piecemeal approach when the larger issue and solution is actually not that far out, potentially. So that, I guess, concerns me, and I just kind of wanted to get that on record, that it feels like the infrastructure project has stalled out, and I'm not clear what the status is of fundraising and whether or not there's a way to get back to that, rather than take some other steps, which will, I think, even more clearly derail the infrastructure project.
I was just going to say, I hear what you're saying, and I think it's a shame to let such a narrow shortfall, stop any plan like this. One other part of the picture that Stephanie's supervisor made clear to us is that Sarah, the previous market manager's plan, within that budget, of money that she had raised, it was essentially going to deplete the farmers market fund, which is a unique fund, from my understanding. In all of Parks and Recreation, there's a general fund that all facilities, vie for, and then the market has its own fund. And so I think there was internal concern around, depletion, complete depletion of that fund was not, am I correct in saying that?
Yes, that was always, that was a concern, although we had, as a commission, decided to spend the entirety of our savings fund the market has on the building. It was still concerning.
I can understand that.
And I think you're right, Holly, and I think something that this commission needs to keep in mind as we do look at other solutions is, is this taking away some money and funding that we could put toward the building? And the answer is yes, it could definitely possibly do that. So I think right now we are looking at options, but once we find what our options are, what is the cost of, I think the idea was to figure out what are those options, what's the cost, and then really need to consider, is that taking away from the building and by how much? It has been, it's our understanding that Parks is continually looking for opportunities to look for that funding for the building to assess whether or not we have enough and it's there.
And I guess the other thing that I observed with it too is just that as the economy fluctuates, then construction costs go up and down. And I think that's something that's been hitting us too, is that when we first got our first bid, things were not, the construction was less expensive. And now everyone's building. And so now everything's building that everything's more expensive to build. And so what happens next year, who knows?
I think one thing I can do for next meeting, though, is to come up with a little bit of a more clear answer for you on where the numbers stand right now. Like, what was the latest bid? What was our final budget? How much was the final shortfall? It is a little muddy, so I will do that.
Thank you. Thanks for the clarity, too. That's helpful.
Now we have our end of season report.
Okay, so this you can look over at your leisure. This will be going up on our website. It's just sort of what we have done over the season and our basic numbers for vendors and that kind of thing. Events that we've done, just to kind of capture the year at a glance. So that's in your packets, but we'll put it up on the website as well.
I just want to say thanks for doing it, and it's a beautiful report.
And now we'll have our market manager report.
Okay, really quick. So this year, the food truck rally applications are out. We're going zero waste this year and asking all of our trucks to use zero waste practices. We've been partnering with Recycle Ann Arbor and Zero Waste Washington on this for the past 2 years and kind of slowly getting toward that point. So this year we felt comfortable helping the trucks source from new sources that are zero waste. And now we're kind of finally completely shifting over to that. So that's exciting. Construction along 5th and Detroit is finished for now, but will continue in the spring for 6 to 8 weeks is the estimate I have heard. Which also includes replacing that parking lot. Just like we redid the parking lot, our main one, the one between the market and Carytown, the smaller parking lot, that's going to be fixed in the spring. We've received a bid for new gutters, and our timeline to install is the spring. I'm hoping April. It is our 100th birthday this year. The market is 100 years old.
Yay.
Wow, yeah, so really great opportunity. We're gonna have a big party in August. We're doing an oral history project that Sarah started when she was here. The library is, archiving those for us. And they're going to also do, work with us to do an exhibit there with photos from history. We'll be doing just a lot on our social media of historical pictures, little information about history of the market, and also a request for people to send in their own photos and memories of the market and putting those on social media. So it should be really fun. Yeah, we have our flower day and CSA day scheduled as well. So that is all I have.
Stephanie, do you have a sense of, or I'm sure others have a sense of how folks performed at the market, like how sales were? I've wondered how, in particular, of course, the construction impacted. And I see the quote, it was a very good year, and I wondered if it was a very good year economically, too, for folks.
I think sales were down.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm seeing nods out in the audience.
And I couldn't imagine that they wouldn't be, but I wondered if that was quantified at all.
But we do have a lot of very committed customers, which is amazing.
Yeah.
And so I think despite the construction, it was still, people came and supported us, but it was tough.
Yeah. Very good.
Now we will open our second public comment period, and these comments are not limited to agenda items.
But can be agenda items.
Bruce Upston, annual vendor. In the request for the proposal you're considering about the radiant heat, to me, it sounded like what we were talking about, the bid was the short section between the office and the main aisle, and then that first section. To me, it seemed like it would make more sense to, and it would be slightly more footage, but it would open up a lot more spaces if you went both sections that were parallel to Detroit Street rather than the section down towards the office. Saw that and I thought, you can't really fit too many people in that short section in there. For not a lot more would go if it went down the two section along Detroit Street.
Okay, thank you.
Carlene Gates. The market this past year, I haven't quite got my figures finalized. It was down a little, not nearly as much as I would have thought. And so that I do contribute that to the dedicated customers that we have that come no matter what. And then in the annual report there, it said that the attendance on Wednesdays, customers, is about half of Saturday. I don't think so. But going forward into a new year, 100th anniversary year, a year when construction is getting finished up, we need to have a new start. And I think we really need to aim for a good advertising campaign to let everybody know that construction's over, that we're here, we're alive, it's a great place to come. And along with that, it seems like some of the other markets we attend, in particular Farmington, they do a lot of special events, and that does bring people down. And maybe this is a year to do some extra stuff. We don't have quite as many vendors. We've got a little bit more space to work, and I think there's things we could put in that space that would be attractive to customers. Things for families, things for kids. There's a program they did last summer at Farmington, and they also do it at Birmingham. It's called Pop for Kids. Could look into something like that. I think the cooking demos we could do some of that on Saturday, not just on Wednesday. We could have a health fair maybe in April, sometime when the market's not completely full. Ice carving for the winter. And I think some holiday celebrations, especially during November, December time. There's a one-day deal that we go to in Farmington on the first Saturday of December, and it does bring a lot of people that don't usually come. It's very well a good thing. The other thing that I've noticed is since we've been losing vendors primarily due to getting too old and even dying, I think we need to recruit some more vendors that have food, that have plants of all kinds, that have even shrubs. And the Christmas department used to have a lot more people bringing various things in that area. And while we have all of those items sort of covered, you can't have just one because it's not as inviting for customers. So the other thing I've noticed is some of the newer vendors they come for a little bit and then we don't see them again. So could we contact some of them and find out why? Is there something that's gone wrong? How can we lure them back in? And I still think that in today's world, we should look at, when we're looking at the rules and all, I think we should look at some way to electronically sign in, some way that we could do that ahead of time. There's got to be somebody in this town that could develop the software for us to do that.
Thank you.
Hi, Debbie Marx again. I would like to remind everyone that 6 months out of the year, we don't fill our market. The artists aren't taking over and taking too many stalls. Actually, I agree with Carlene. I think there need to be more vendors on a limited basis. We never fill Wednesdays, just to get the people in there, just to have the new vendors. The 12 spaces for artists, I really think that's a bit outdated, and I would really like to see that raised. I think that was an old-time number. Coleman had 2 stalls, Deanna had 3. If we could all have 2, the artist number wouldn't increase, and it would just add a more, people would be in the same place, and customers would like that. Everyone would like that. It would be a more fair system. I would like to see people that come all the time, rather than be given more seniority, if they come 100 times out of 144, get brownie points. I know that's a silly little word, brownie points. Oh, I'm going to be late today 5 minutes. I've been coming for the last 10 years every single market day. I'm going to be 5 minutes late. The brownie points could be used in little things like that. Anyway, it's just a thought. Thank you.
I just want to follow up on a couple things. Like, one thing I noticed right here in Stephanie's report is there's 9 different categories of vendors that she mentions, and yet only one of these categories is singled out for unfair treatment. Why is that okay? And we talked a lot, I heard you guys talk a lot about that ratio, when was that ratio made and everything like that. But when you're actually at market, that ratio means absolutely nothing towards who is actually set up at the market. That's based on who was accepted to become a vendor at the market. That's when you decide how many vendors are there in reality. Those annual stalls being assigned are like a blueprint off somewhere, but that's not who's at market on a day ever. So again, allowing us to just be regular vendors, like the other 8 categories on here out of the 9, wouldn't mean there would be more vendors or that they would have any more stalls on any day ever. The only thing that would make there be more artists would be if Stephanie lets more artists become daily vendors. So that ship has sailed. The only thing happening here is 7 people, human beings. I started when I was 25. I made my living. I'm 46. I'm treated unfairly, and it's just not right, and it should change. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Christine Shupry. I have a couple questions. Of the Market Commission, are all of you Ann Arbor residents?
Yes.
Okay. Of the Market Fund, where does that money come from?
I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, I think that I remember reading it was added to and established many years ago, I think like in the 30s, by vendor fees.
Okay.
But I don't know I don't know if that is all of the funds or the percentage, so.
I can add just a little, because I've been looking into the history. The city put in some money initially in the 30s. I can't remember the exact numbers. It may be about $9,000. And then the history that I've been reading, in the 30s, it was also vendor fees that were going into the fund.
Okay, and now it's run by the Parks Department, is that correct?
The market is run by the Parks Department.
And that's part of the city. I'm just trying to figure out, like, does the tax base of the city pay for the market?
So that's a difficult question a little bit because our funding comes from so many different places. But a part does come from taxes because millage goes to pay for a part of the market, especially like infrastructure updates, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And then the general parks fund does pay for also pieces of the market to run, and that is funded by taxpayer money. Yes.
Okay. I guess I'm trying to determine, I know that you're an advisory council and that you recommend things to the city council. Is that correct? And they can either act on your suggestions or not. So I'm trying to figure out, when it comes to market rules, are the people that actually pay the taxes in the city determining the rules? Or are people, you know, farmers can come from Ohio, they can come from Canada. So who's determining who can be a vendor here and who gets to advance?
So that is done largely by the market manager.
Okay.
So I review all the applications and make the final decision. There is the possibility to contest a decision I make, and then that would go through the community services administrator, who oversees Parks and Rec, but also several other departments in the city. And then PMAC is an advisory committee. They don't usually inform on individual vendor applications unless there's one I'm not sure about or is a little tricky and different, and then they will advise.
Okay. I just would like you all to consider the concerns that we've brought before you. Ann Arbor is supposed to be a progressive city, and I think that the segregation that we have between market vendors should become obsolete. I think that we should treat them all on an equitable, fair basis, and I hope that you will consider that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I know I've already been up here, but I just wanted to talk, just maybe bring up the thing about the city is part of the parks. And at one time, which wasn't that long ago, it was when I was on the commission, it was completely separate, the whole budget for that, and the market did have that fund balance, so to speak. And I think it was pension liabilities is why it got rolled over into the whole parks budget, because that's been a big deal in the last few years for municipalities. And I believe that's the piece that changed that.
Thanks, Carleen.
Do we have any other public comments?
I have one question.
Yeah.
When I made the comment earlier about public market and farmers market, when did it change from Ann Arbor Farmers Market to the public market?
So I can tell you, originally it was called the Curb Market.
Okay.
When it was right around City Hall.
Okay.
So,
But it's been the Ann Arbor Farmers Market forever, and I just noticed on the television, it
So
says,
the commission's called the Public Market Advisory Commission, but the market's called the Ann Arbor Farmers Market. And I don't know why they're two different names, but to my understanding, the commission's always been called the Public Market Advisory Commission.
oh, really?
And that might date back to
Okay,
some long time ago.
okay.
yeah.
But it's still the Ann Arbor Farmers Market,
Yeah, it's
not
kind of confusing.
the Ann Arbor
In a way.
Public Market, correct?
It is the Ann Arbor Farmers Market.
Okay,
For the
good.
market. I'm not sure why.
Okay, let us know about that,
Was
because,
it deeded to the city, called a city market, and the original deed where the land for the market was deeded to the city? Carol Scott says it all the time.
okay.
It was called in the original deed where the land was given to the city in, but it had to
Right.
be a city market, and it says city market, not farmers market.
Interesting.
Well,
Thank you.
it's a good question, and I wonder if maybe this commission is called the Public Market Commission in case there are other markets ever, or types of markets, or also to cover the artisan market. I wonder
it
if the
doesn't-
idea
yeah.
was that the commission would advise if there were additional markets, like in
Oh,
some
okay.
communities where there are more than one market.
Okay, thank you.
I will try to find out. I don't know.
Okay. If there are no other public comments, we are ready to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And can you call the time?
Oh, it is 6:57.